My name is Oscar García-Johnson, Academic Dean for Central Latino Fuller Theological Seminary. I teach in the field of theology, Latinx studies, and decolonial theories. Today, I am responding to Dr. Willie Jennings' first lecture on the Patent Lectures, Creating Harm, Forming Christians Who Believe in Creation and Creatures. It is an honor to respond to Dr. Willie Jennings, dear Willie, colleague, friend, and sort of a big brother mentor in the intellectual projects that we both share. As a matter of fact, in more than one occasion, when I've articulated some of my theological insights in our revered guilds, colleagues have often said to me, Oscar, you sound like Willie Jennings. Clearly, they're not making reference to my command of the English language or the way I use poetic and metaphorical language that is unbeatable when compared to Dr. Jennings. After all, I am an incurable ESL speaker with a peculiar Central American, made in LA, English accent. And as a matter of fact, that goes for my Caribbean, Brazilian, Mexicanized Spanish accent too, which kind of resembles a Pentecost of tongues that kind of challenge different AI, artificial intelligence, speech recognition apps when I speak. And I speak not just with my mouth. My wife reminds me I speak with my whole body. I think that's typical of several of us Latinos. Anyway, I think our resemblance, Willie, and I want to really respond to you more than to your paper, is to you as a colleague, because this for me is a conversation. I think our resemblance may have to do with how you and I search for theological generosity and epistemic abundance in the other. And in doing so, we opt for learned ignorance, docta ignorantia, to quote the medieval German theologian and philosopher Nicholas of Cusa. The idea that knowledge is not knowing. New beginnings, if I am reading you correctly, ought to begin there, in the act of acknowledging that we have no real knowledge. For instance, a real doctrine of creation. It follows that all our accumulated knowledge through the centuries of research and writings, the so-called tradition of the tradition of the tradition, in Western intellectualism, in tandem with our archival fever, Derrida, which protects the borders of our Western canonical imagination, do tell us only that which we know, but do not tell us that which we do not know. And here rests our problem. For the cognition industry that Western knowledge, Christian formation, and pastoral and missionary practice and their corresponding assessments, as you indicate, provide us, pretty much lack on this fundamental measurement, an epistemic maxim, docta ignorantia, what we do not know, and so we make up for. This generates a form of knowledge that is referred to by indigenous communities around the world as terminal knowledge. And they do not mean by the term a terminal degree. By that term, these indigenous communities mean a form of cognitive disease that kills and exterminates the other and the earth. This is exactly what Boaventura de Souza Santos, the epistemologist of the South and professor of law of Coimbra in Wisconsin, calls epistemicide. As a consequence of this cognitive pandemic, an epistemic and relational vacuum, an ugly ditch, if you will, is made evident in usual encounters between the Western Christian agent and the other. A ditch between the Western knowledge of God and creation and the world knowledge of God and creation. The collapse of these two human experiences that are essentially interlocal from one location to another location and intercontextual from one context to another context has been tragically resolved by the West by way of a supersessionist operation and positionality, as you well point out. Once Westernized Christians become first readers, self-centered, and think of themselves as creators and carriers of universal knowledge for the sake of the world, then subjectivity, materiality, and especially creativity are instrumentalized through a powerful epistemic machine called colonial modernity, which you will allude to in tomorrow's presentation. So your title and proposal in these lectures really speaks to me. They speak to me. Creating harm, forming Christians who believe in creation and creatures. The title strikes me as clever, considering that you are speaking to Fuller Seminary as a Fuller voice, and at the same time contrapunctually to Fuller's intellectual evangelical tradition. Therefore, a brother from a different mother that we are, pardon my French, and I take it as an invitation for us Fuller faculty, staff, and students to register Christian formation otherwise, framed by a set of key elements that I think you provide. 1, the perceptual reciprocal vocation. 2, the colonial curricular tactics. 3, improvisational models of education. And 4, a doctrinal vision of creation that begins with docta ignorantia. That is, it begins with unlearning and relearning. And to quote you, in the new school of the Spirit, we will learn of our God, the one God who creates, recreates what God created in the first place. And here is the big challenge for us. We have to accomplish all this here and now from within the belly of the beast, colonial modernity, that is. And how do we do this when our subject matter and content, body, land, and imagination, both human and animal, not to speak of our infrastructures, are wounded and deformed by multiple supersessionist operations? You are calling us into new beginnings as Christian academicians, as institutions with the business of providing formation. You have provided some exciting biblical narratives such as Acts chapter 10, and you have articulated possible pathways such as persexual reciprocity and, God forbids, healing assimilation. That will be a very hard one to swallow for me as an immigrant of the South, but we can have a conversation, see if you mean what I think, kind of a reversal assimilation or pluriversality or transmodernity. We'll have to speak about that to kind of get to the heart of it. But anyway, like you, I am highly unsatisfied with the doctrine of creation. We have inherited and we have created, so to speak. But I believe we ought to start with the doctrine of decreation, so to speak, before we can provide new beginnings in its positive moment, recreation. Decreation is a new beginning, I argue, and works well within your Christian imaginary. And let me end kind of with this, is I have recently submitted the first volume of 5 that I am contracted with in my new series, Theology of the New World. It will be published by Editorial Clear in Spanish, as I said. I own that to my people. I've been reading in English more than Spanish for different reasons. One of them, you need to write in the academy to remain in the academy, so to speak. The title series is intriguing because New World is a very bad word in the Americas. So I am using it at purpose to demonstrate the underside of the European project of the conquest and colonization and modernization and development and all that, you know, forms of soteriological changes. And using it to subvert the idea and show how, in a way, this new world has indeed erupted in ways not anticipated by the West. And in the aftermath of the colonial wound, we have indeed a new world that we need to attend to. And the theological process is tasked to walk with communities, with lands, with peoples, and with imaginaries to track the activity of God in this new world, so to speak. So I offer 5 theses for the making of theology in the new world. I want to leave you for a conversation when we are going to have dialogue. And I believe this speak into the new beginnings and the doctrine of creation. Thesis number 1, we ought to begin from faith and seek for faith in all peoples and lands. We have not done that. We have begun with faith, but faith in ourselves, talking about from the West and from the colonial. And we have not looked for God in the other. We've looked more for Satan than for God. So it's a fascination with Satan in the West. Second thesis, we ought to begin with docta ignorantia, with learned ignorance, as a form of basic knowledge, as we learn to recognize the knowledge of God and of creation in the other. Thesis number 3, we ought to begin with the probiotic principle of the gospel of Jesus of Nazareth, as we abandon the antibiotic principle of civilizing missions and world evangelization. Number 4, we ought to begin with the praxis of the Spirit as decolonial healer, as the first word of the theological process. And finally, we ought to begin with theology as biography, as we learn to read the Bible through narratives under the principle of theological abundance and generosity. Thank you very much. I look forward to our interaction next.